Órale, Cholo, choque los tres chingones, boxing shots, all the chingones y chingonas. All right, man. We had a big fight, a huge fight, a mega fight over the weekend. At least across the pond, that's what it was to them. This side of the world, nobody really cared, and that's just the way it goes. Although I was really interested, man, and I was engaged into this matchup right here. And I'm gonna cover it here when because I know the boys, they're not gonna want to talk about it on Friday, and I don't even think they spent the time watching this fight. So, and there's so much to get into this Friday, so I'll just go ahead and cover this fight here. All right, so I went ahead, I watched this fight, I did a live calling it, and it was a good fight, man. I was really entertained. Now it was sloppy at times. Um, some people are saying, "Hey, can this be fight of the year?" I hope not. I hope not because while it was a good fight, it was sloppy. It wasn't like they got into the pocket and just kept exchanging and exchanging and exchanging. No, there was a lot of clinching. There was a lot of the referee having to get in there and break them up. So it was a it was a good fight, but I wouldn't say it was a great fight. No, absolutely not, man. Like I said, it got ugly, it got dirty, it got sloppy at times, and I'm like, nah, look, I don't want this to be fight of the year. I don't. This was no, 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 no. It wasn't that great of a fight. Okay, it was a good, decent rivalry. Um, and yeah, you know, we saw Chris Eubank get the victory at the end, and I think that was the right call. Now, me myself personally, I was going for my boy Connor Benn, right? But at the end, I'm like, you know what? I think Chris Eubanks did enough to win the fight. Had it been a draw, I wouldn't have had a problem. Had they given Connor Benn, I wouldn't have had a big major issue with it. I would have just been like, they probably gave it to him because he's younger and he has more of a boxing career. It's not that he really like lost the fight on a grand scale like that. He used up a lot of energy in the first few rounds. A lot of bobbing and weaving, a lot of moving around, a lot of throwing some haymakers, throwing punches with some really bad intentions, using up a lot of energy. Had he reserved some of that energy, I think he probably would have stopped Chris Eubanks or at least dropped him because later on in that fight, even though Connor Benn was a little bit more depleted, there was times that he rocked Chris Eubanks. I'm not so sure if Chris Eubank ever really rocked Connor Benn. I'm sure Connor Benn was exhausted and felt some of the punches and kind of, pushed him back a little bit against the ropes. But I never really saw Connor Benn get spaghetti legs or get a little buzz the way I saw Chris Eubank get a little buzz. And had Connor Benn just kept himself a little bit more calm in the first few rounds instead of using so much energy, I think he probably could have stolen this fight, but it was a good fight. Here's the thing that I want to bring up, though. Okay, they are talking about a rematch, and we'll get to that in just a second. But I do want to bring this up because people were talking about Chris Eubanks having to go down and drain himself to make 160. These guys were supposed to fight about 2 years ago, and they had agreed at a catch weight at like 156 or 157, one of those two, right? For this fight, actually, it was at 160. So it's like, okay, now there was a lot of story being made of like, hey, you know what? He's got to drain himself. He's got to go down in weight. He's got to make 160. He has to really drain himself. And I just kind of went along with it. I've seen Chris Eubank Jr. fights, all right, but I never really followed his career like that. I saw when he fought, George Groves and Avni Yildirim and those guys, man, Liam Smith, and I knew he was campaigning at 168. All right. Here's the thing. I found this out after the fact because I didn't really put much attention to him and his career and what he was doing. All right, so Connor Benn moved up, right, to 160. Now you could say he only moved up one weight class because he had two fights at 154. Although he hasn't really been active, but we'll get to him in a second. Chris Eubank Jr. All right. He fought one time in 2022, two times in 2023, and one time last year in 2024. He fought four times since the year 2022. You guys want to know what all those fights have in common? They were all at 160 pounds. Four fights. His last four fights before this one. And by the way, the fight in 2024, it wasn't like it was in January. It was in October. So we're talking about the end of last year. So his last four fights were at 160 pounds. And what was the weight that they're fighting at for this one? 160. Yet there was this big story that, man, he has to drain himself to make the weight. Now look, maybe he did. Maybe he has trouble making 160. Although, look, those four fights, he won three of those. He lost one to the first one to Liam Smith, comes back and stops Liam Smith, and his last fight, he wins again by TKO at 160 pounds. So if we're over there talking about like, oh man, Chris Eubank Jr., weight drain, yeah, to really completely deplete himself to make this fight happen. Guy, his last four fights were at this same weight class. And his last fight before this one, like I said, it wasn't like it was 2, 3 years ago. It was at the end of last year. That doesn't mean that he doesn't have trouble making 160 pounds. But I just thought that was an interesting story because he was pushing that out there so much on how much he has to really deplete his body, how much he has to drain himself, how much he has to go down to make this fight happen. Like, wait a second, homie. Your last four fights was at that same weight class, and your last two fights, you actually stopped your opponents at that weight class. So I really did not pay attention to what weight Chris Eubank Jr. was fighting in for his last few fights. So I found that pretty interesting, man. So when it comes to Conor Benn, he's a 147-pound fighter, right? He's a welterweight. Although his last two fights, they were at 154 pounds. He didn't look good there. Some may say like, oh, it's because he's not taking steroids anymore, or PEDs, whatever it may be. Hey, to each their own, right? Now, he has not been in the ring for over a year. He last fought in February of last year, and he weighed in at 150 pounds, just a little over 150 pounds for that fight. So he's not really a big dude, man, for him to go up to make 160. So whether you want to count it as him moving up one weight class or moving up two weight classes, you could give or take here, whichever one, doesn't really matter. Nonetheless, they get in the ring, and you can see he's a small guy. You can see Chris Eubank Jr. is a much bigger guy. Now, to be fair, at the same time, Chris Eubank is older. He's 35 years old, where Conor Benn, I believe he's, 28? So, I mean, you could give and take here and there, right? Eubank wins the fight. He yells to the heavens as he drops to his knees, like this was the biggest fight of his life. And I get it, there's history there. To us, we don't really care about it, but to them, it was huge. It was a big deal. I thought after learning all this, man. First of all, going into the fight, I thought it was stacked against Conor Benn a little bit more. But after learning all this, I'm like, okay, yes, man. I mean, come on, this had to favor Chris Eubank. And the fact that Conor Benn was able to wobble him a little bit, kind of told me something like, okay, man, that's right. Conor Benn had a good showing, showed a lot of grit, showed a lot of guts. Good fight. they're talking about a rematch. They're talking about, hey, how about we do it again in September? Check this out. Look, man, me myself personally, I'd rather just Conor Benn just go back down to 147 and start fighting those guys down there. I don't really, even though this was a pretty good fight and I enjoyed it, no need to see it again, man. No need to see it again. That's just, again, there's a lot of money. It's a UK thing. I understand that. I understand it's a UK thing. So there's going to be money. If there's a rematch, that sucker's going to sell out again, and people are going to be interested, at least on that side of the pond, right? Here, it's like, nah, screw that, man. I don't really want to see that again. Look, if it happens, will I watch? Absolutely. When I say I don't want to see it again, it doesn't mean that I don't want to turn on the tube and not see this fight. It just means there's other fights I want to see Conor Benn in. Chris Eubank, I mean, look, there's all this silliness about, oh, he should fight Canelo and, next year. And, well, we'll see what's up with that. But this fight right here, I enjoyed it. I thought it was fun for the moment. I'm not gonna say I hope it's not fight of the year. Gosh, there was just too much clinching. It was fun though. It was a fun fight, but nonetheless, I'm not gonna have this pity party for Chris Eubank. Oh, he had to drain himself so much. Stop it. His last four fights was at 160 pounds. But just for this fight, he needs to go on social media and make a big deal about how much he has to drain himself. Dog, you did not move down in weight. You've been at this weight class since 2022. You fought four times, won three out of those. The last two, you stopped your opponents. So no, I'm not buying it. And he didn't even bother to make the weight for this fight. So, like I said, it doesn't mean he doesn't have problems making the weight. So maybe he really truly does have problem making the weight. But nonetheless, man, I don't really want to see a rematch, man. I want to see Conor Benn go 147 and throw down with those guys over there. Chris Eubank Jr., whatever, man. Fight any of the dudes at 168, not named Canelo. Fight anybody at 168, not named Canelo. Fight Munguia, fight Pacheco, fight Christian and Billy, fight Caleb Plant, fight anybody at 168. Edgar Berlanga, fight anybody at 168. Or if you're sticking at 160 because you've been fighting at 160, stay at 160 and throw down with the Carlos Adames, throw down with the Yanni Beck. But if they revisit this fight, it's not at the top of my list, man. It's really not. But let's see what they do because there's a lot of money for this fight, man. So you guys tell me what you guys thought about the fight. I thought it was fun, but that's it. That's it. We don't need to have it again. If they do, I'll watch. I'm not gonna lie, but it's not really what I want. Cholo, Choclo, los tres chingones boxing. Shots all the chingones, chingonas. Catch you guys on next round.